Hello and welcome to another ACY Securities market update. My name is Alistair Schultz and I'm going to be your host for today's trading journey. Today's first video that I'm going to be doing is a little bit different than normal. I'm going to be having a look at a couple of things that I've actually had a bit of thoughts about overnight. So I'm going to explain some of those issues to you right now. The first thing that I'm looking at is about earnings season. We've seen earnings season close for the US and we still have another couple of weeks to go for the Australian earnings season. But something that was interesting to me was that instead of having the expected maybe half of companies reporting in earnings season, we've seen nearly 90%. And of those, 58% have actually exceeded the expectations that we were seeing across the board. This is starkly different to what we were looking at the very beginning. And of course, it does put an implication that perhaps the stock market is a little bit overheated. But the reality of the situation is when we look at the stock market, a lot of us think that the stock market should mimic what's going on in the general economy. But we don't look at it that way. The stock market is really looking at the optimism. You can consider it the barometer of optimism, if you will. And we really look at what's happening in the next few months or what is going to be happening ahead of time. So right now, we're seeing a lot of this optimism both focused on the idea of us getting a vaccine, of economies getting back to work, and things getting back to a little bit of normality, and that is what we are focusing on. Naturally, the tech side of stocks has obviously been helping fuel the fire a little bit and pushing it up there. But in the long run, we are going to have to keep an eye on that stimulus because it still does leave us with a risk of becoming addicted to the stimulus, in which case we'd end up in a situation very similar to what we see in Japan, where they continuously have to provide quantitative easing to help prop up the economy. Now, what are we looking at for 2021? And that is the big question, and that is what the stock market is really looking to and what it echoes. It echoes what we think about in the future. So right now, when we look at 2021, we have to consider the options that we might have available to us. And the big ones that I'm really looking at right now are what's happening with the economy for one thing, but two, what's happening with the vaccines. And there really is only two scenarios that happen here. One is we don't get a vaccine. The other is we do get a vaccine. But in both instances, they have their own implications and they come with their own risks. For example, we've seen all the way through with this no vaccine through the pandemic that we haven't had, well, the vaccine that we haven't had yet, we've seen some problems. We've seen companies going bust. We've seen companies rise and getting all powerful, mostly the ones that are focused on cloud and e-commerce. We've also seen issues that have arisen from bond markets because of stimulus and yield curves going awry. And that has in turn turned us to start putting a lot of money towards the other safe haven assets such as gold. So what happens if all of a sudden overnight we wake up and there is a vaccine available and we do start getting it pushed out across the countries and people do start becoming immune? Well, naturally you have to look at the idea that perhaps some of these safe haven assets that have really propagated in value will end up having a very quick tumble back down. The other one to look at is what about the tech companies, the ones that have been around the cloud services and e-commerce? When people can go back to work, go back to businesses, how does that really look for the end result picture? We're ending up going to see that maybe perhaps some of these tech companies and perhaps the services that they've really built a great foundation on throughout the pandemic is no longer necessary. And therefore, they're going to have to innovate yet again. So there are definitely some things that I'm considering in the long term, and that is a problem. The next problem to think about overnight that I was looking at was going on with the US stimulus decisions. Now we know last week, and I spoke about yesterday, this idea of us potentially getting more stimulus for the US economy, but Republicans and Democrats couldn't come to an agreement. Now we have the US president who has also signed some executive orders, and he's done 4 of them in fact. And of the 4, I only see one that can actually provide any basis for help, and that would be the student loan deferment or at least some level of extension. That is the only one there that he actually has the offering power to do something about. The other 3 still require the votes of Congress to go through. So therefore, was it really just a ploy coming up to the political election? I'm starting to think that is likely the case. Outside of that, this optimism that we are seeing for a vaccine, I'm a little bit pessimistic on the side, knowing that coronavirus has been around for a very long time. Not just the COVID-19 one, but the ones that we've had before. We've seen 20 years of people trying to develop vaccines for coronavirus types, and yet we haven't had much success. Now, admittedly, whilst the US does have a population of 5 million with COVID-19 right now, and there is obviously a dire need for a vaccine, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to be able to get there that quickly. When it comes to the trials and the investment side of things, when it comes to biotech, we're seeing issues there as well. Most people are investing in the early stage or the announcement of a vaccine being looked at by certain pharmaceutical companies. Yet, in stage 1 trials, nearly 70% fail. From there, in the second stage, another 30% out of that fail again. So to get right through to the stage 3 and stage 4 rounds of trials, there are problems that come with it. And I, for one, will personally be waiting for more evidence to suggest that a vaccine is in fact going to be available to us and is going to be working. Otherwise, that's really all I have for you right now. I will be giving you another update a bit later in the day. But naturally, if you have any comments, questions, or you'd like to get in contact with me, feel free to shoot me an email at talk2al@acy.com. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe to this video so you get more great content from me and ACY Securities in the future. Have a great trading day ahead.